Chris. It's good to run into you with my hot mint tea.
Good to run into you, Heather, with my plain old glass of water. I finished my coffee before we talked today, so it was a already a morning tinto for me. But I'm
Yes.
glad you have a mint tea.
Yeah, welcome to Morning Mint Tea with Heather and Chris. Yeah, so uh I left the United States. You already knew that, and most listeners probably knew that. And it was back in 2003. And I was living in New York City. I was there when 9/11 happened, as I've mentioned in a previous episode. I was disgusted by what the US was doing in response, and I had visited my in laws in the UK and had experienced what I used to call a civilized country with good public transport via the amazing trains and the buses and a wonderful healthcare system. The BBC, with its high quality entertainment and news without advertising, just seemed utopic to me. And so when we had the opportunity to move to the UK, I was really excited about it and did it. Of course, later I came to realize the UK's own role in the war on Iraq, Tony Blair, etc., but it did become my home for 17 years. Now, I didn't consider myself an activist when I left the US, so I didn't really feel like there was a question of me staying and fighting. That just wasn't on my radar at all. It was just like leave. Like I don't like it here, leave. And also more to do with wanting to see what it was like to live in another country, a country that seemed to have, and it's still true, a lot less individualism than the United States, as well as a better sense of social support through their social programs. And I wasn't a target in the United States for any kind of oppression other than, being a woman. So I went to the UK and I did become an activist there. And of course, I spoke the same language. I worked on climate change activism. And then I left the UK. And this was prompted by having a child, partly because I wanted her to be around a lot of family and a particular culture that values family quite a bit, which is what we have here in Colombia. And partly because I did have climate change on my mind and societal collapse. And I believed, and I still believe, that the Colombian culture is much more resilient to those kinds of crises because of its own history and the fact that it's never experienced the level of so called development that people in the UK and the US feel entitled to. However, I had trouble figuring out how to make a living after a year. And I also felt like my activism, being able to speak English and not being able to speak very much Spanish, meant that I could do a lot more good by going back to the UK. So that is when I began doing activism around asylum seekers and refugees. I understand the system there very well. I understand the culture. And so living there, I was able to support these humans fleeing to the UK seeking better lives. And then back for the family reasons, I left the UK again. But again, I felt a strong urge to go back and fight when the Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, lost the elections in December 2019. I felt like things were going to get a lot worse for everyone, and I thought I should be there and be using the fact that I can speak English and I know the culture, to do good there. So I went back, was only able to do a little bit of activism before the pandemic hit, ended up being in a place very isolating. And so again, I wanted to be back with family. I left the UK. And now I say, I'm not leaving Colombia. There is a benefit to living in a place where the cost of living is low for someone like me who can earn money from outside the country. It means there's a distribution of wealth from Europe and the US into Colombia, and it means that I can work less and do more activism in the English language virtually. And we are around a lot of family, and now I have a partner here, so I'm not leaving Colombia. So these thoughts, Chris, were prompted by a podcast episode that we heard about people deciding whether or not to leave the US given the current political situation. And I think some of it comes down to, are you a target? Are you in danger? Would you be able to do more from the outside? And we have a mutual friend that questions very strongly whether people with privilege should be leaving the US if they're not targets. And I have those questions in me as well. I worry about all the privileged people leaving, and then what's left are the people most vulnerable who can't afford to leave, and the people who want those people dead. I do worry about that. Now, obviously, I could go back to the US and fight. I speak the language, I have a US passport, but I honestly don't know how I would live. I don't know how I would be able to afford healthcare. And as I say, it feels like I can do more from here. And at the same time, giving my daughter a quality of life that I would like her to have with all the family and quality of education and being bilingual and having a strong sense of community. So, curious, Chris, what are your thoughts on immigration?
Yes, thank you, Heather, for sharing your thoughts, your experiences, and the connections to many domains of discussion, from governments to activism to privilege. I will say this as what is coming to my mind first. I came up with the sentence, not that I invented it or anything, but it's a sentence that expresses succinctly how I feel about what is important, specifically in terms of the opinions of people. And that succinct sentence is as follows: if you're not my friend, and you're not my family, and you're not my customer, and you're not my supplier, you're at the bottom of my priority list. And I have found this interesting to hold and reflect on, because it's guiding me to reflect on what you've said and on today's conversation in a certain way. The people who may say that I should stay or should I go. Now, for our audience, I'm currently living in the United States of America, here in Queens, New York. There will be very well people who say I should stay and fight fascism, if you will. There will be people who say I should take care of my family first. But those people are not necessarily my people, even if they may say things I agree with. I believe over the last couple of years, particularly over the last year, I have learned much about what it means to prioritize, given that my impact on the universe is probably fairly infinitesimal. But that doesn't mean my impact on the universe is zero. It doesn't mean my impact on the universe doesn't matter. It means, at least my interpretation of this realization is, it means I need to get very specific about who I want to interact with, where I want to place myself physically and digitally, and how I want to spend my energy. You're talking about this in the context of emigration. The deeper context that you started this conversation with is the motivations for moving from one place to another, your motivations. I do have certain things coming up in my life, geospatially, geographically, if you will, that I'm not yet ready to discuss publicly. But I will just surface the recent realization for me, I might even actually describe it as the recent decision to drop my identification with the United States of America. Meaning, I no longer think of myself as an American, even though I have a US passport. I was born in this country. I was raised in this country. I've never lived abroad except for a summer in Belgium many years ago for an internship. But I no longer consider myself an American. And so what does that even mean if I was born and raised in this country and I have a US passport? Well, I am finding that the world of possibility opens up for me when I stop identifying with a nation state. And I think there are various conversations going on that are not at all new. And probably many of our listeners have heard variants of this conversation. What does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be British? What does it mean to be French? And as I've said now in a couple of podcast episodes, it is my belief that terms of art, terminology, jargon are socially constructed, meaning that they are always subject to social power dynamics. I am able to see now in a way I was not able to see after 9/11 and during the Iraq War, that there are specific, shall we say, subcultures in the United States of America that want the definition of an American to be a very specific thing. There are certain other elements in the United States of America that want that to be very different. And I'll save the minutia for another time. But when I observed, when I began being able to see these social forces at play, I began to ask myself, to what degree do I even have to participate in that conversation about what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean for me to be an American? What if I just stop thinking of myself this way? Now, the point I want to raise is, if I don't consider myself an American, or if I don't consider myself to identify with any nation state, including the nation states where my parents come from, does that mean I can go anywhere and live anywhere? And the answer is no. Borders are a real thing in terms of the administrative reality. The physical reality, in many cases, is arbitrary. But that administrative reality is, again, an expression of social power dynamics. And we can talk about what the drawing of administrative borders had done in the so-called Middle East. It's a topic you and I talk about often. And the reality of those borders, the reality of the administrative nature of country borders, means there is a physical experience that people have. Because it's a whole lot easier to transfer money, for instance, across borders than it is to transfer people across borders. And you know this firsthand because of your refugee activism in the United Kingdom. We know this here in the USA because of the topic of immigration and what that has done to culture and politics in this country. But as we see more the reality of the arbitrariness of these lines on a map, we are also to see more clearly that the people with money and power are not affected by borders in the same way. In fact, it's the people with money and power who drew the borders in the first place, such that most of the world is stuck where they are. It's become clear to me that the tiny number of people who get to say where borders are and where they are not, and what is legal and what is not, don't really have too much care for all the rest of us. They're just not interested in anything more than themselves. And the rest of us are just ways to meet their own interests in a certain way. And as I'm saying this out loud, I'm sounding to myself to be quite demoralized, but I don't think that's the expression I want to portray. I don't think that's the posture I really have. Rather, I think what's coming to my mind is, at least for me, when I dropped my identification with the nation state, I was able to see more clearly the commonality I have with people in all different places, from all different backgrounds, and with all different histories. And I'm able to see that there are ways to be in community, even across these administrative boundaries. And as a matter of fact, I have 2 clients right now who are in different countries in Europe. I have a client also in the United States. I have many conversations with people such as yourself in Latin America and in the UK, in continental Europe, increasingly in Africa and Asia. And I'm able to see that there are ways we can work together and be together in community. Now, that does not mean borders don't exist, because like I said, the establishment of borders is a way of expressing power. But I'm able to see that in today's world, and digital technology is a big part of this, there are more opportunities opening up such that in certain areas, the limitation is not the borders, but our own minds, our own thinking about our own identity. And that is a big, long ramble based on your one question, what do I think about the idea of emigration? I could probably go on, but I would be interested to stop myself and just hear what comes up for you in this moment.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, the identifying with the nation state. I think in my opening essay, I never mentioned being American or British or Colombian, right? I have the privilege of having 3 passports, and the reason I could obtain one of them was because of the ease of having the US passport. Made it easy for me to go through the process to get the British one. Yeah. However, so I guess I would call that American privileges. You know, like we have American privileges. If we go anywhere in the world, we have a lot of privilege with being fast tracked to be allowed to enter a country, to be able to get a visa. And yeah, I think, you know, when people were talking about some people who have left the US and they seem to be people with privilege, not targeted by racism or anything like that. Like one of these people, Jason Stanley, who speaks openly about fascism, it turned out his daughter's biracial. You know, so I do think there are like things we don't know about people and when people feel fear. And then there will be the whole bit around mental health. those can be hidden ways that people are oppressed. And I don't live in the US. And one of the ways that I feel like I am able to support people in the US is by my not having the daily barrage of US media, walking down the street, being reminded, seeing Trump signs, like that is, who knows what that's like, because I don't. I mean, you do, other people do. I don't, but it means that I can be in relationship with people in the United States from a place of distance, which gives me a perspective and a kind of grounding to be able to hear everything and not get overwhelmed, because I have that privilege of being here. And I think it's very real that we know it's very real that people's mental health is being affected by being in the United States, whether or not they are targeted or not. Their mental health will be affected and they might have the resources to leave. And these are probably people who weren't going to fight anyway. It's not like we're losing an activist. But even then, there will be activists who make the decision to drop out. And this is whether they leave the US or not. And this is because we do each need to figure out how to get our needs met. And we do that in community. But sometimes there are certain spaces and times when our needs are not being met by whatever we were doing. And we make the decision to change gears, to rest, maybe to leave the country and have the kind of distance and perspective that I'm able to get. And maybe those people will go back refreshed or whatever. But I think second guessing people's motives is tricky, and that we need to be really gentle about that and know that we actually don't know what's going on for people.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's surfacing something that I've been talking with my clients about and talking with you about in certain ways, because I've been talking with myself about it. This idea, which maybe is another way to express my succinct sentence about priorities, this idea that once we choose our priorities, we are not obligated to apologize for them. We're not even obligated to explain them. Now, we do have to work through, or at least some of us have to work through, the feelings that might come up as we prioritize our lives. Maybe feelings of guilt, maybe feelings of shame, maybe feelings that we're abandoning a certain community or a certain cause. But I have spoken with and followed certain people who did decide to leave the country for the reasons that you referenced. There is a real relationship between where we are physically and where we are mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. That is real. And I would say, building on my rant from earlier in our podcast, I would say that is one reason why the people who have the power to set borders set them as they are, set them as we see today. The relationships between physical space and internal space within ourselves. It is absolutely true that being in a different place can do wonders for our capacity, not only to act, but simply to be. I am seeing that. You have certainly seen that and are seeing that in the relationships you have with other people in other countries. including me here in the United States of America. And so, as we close out today, I think I would just really agree with what you just said. The idea that unless we really, really, really know a person well, we cannot say what's fully going on with somebody who decides to stay or to go. Now, we may judge, and judgment is a very human thing. Our brains are highly optimized to make snap judgments, but doesn't mean our judgments are correct, and it also doesn't mean that we have to act on those judgments. I've been trying to practice thinking less about me and more about we, and all the different forms that the concept of we can take. And the key ingredient, I think, for that is compassion for others. And it's very difficult to have compassion for the whole world, but at the very least, if we can get a sense of who is most important to us and have compassion for them, that seems to me like a decent start.
Yeah, and I guess I would leave it with we can mourn that people are leaving a place that they don't want to leave. And that this will have knock-on effects, creating more vulnerability for the people who can't leave, who want to leave. And that's, yeah, there's no like solution to that. It's a way, it makes sense for the person leaving, and it makes sense what the impacts are going to be. So that kind of heavy heart that we want to not suppress, I think, is important. But yeah, it was good to chat with you about this, and I still have more tea to drink. So I will continue.
I will leave you to that, and I thank you for today's conversation. As always, I imagine that the topic of identity, borders, and geography will come up continually across our discussions. And I look forward to seeing how that discussion morphs and changes in its own way.
Yeah, me too. Bye, Chris.
Bye, Heather. Talk to you soon. You have been listening to Morning Tinto with Heather Luna and Chris Musay-Sequeira. Each time we record, we use the news of the day to be as freshly brewed as possible. So subscribe, follow along, and comment if you can. Let us know what you think, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.